Travelers to Italy are naturally drawn to its ancient beauty. Mountains, rivers, towns, and vineyards. But for the Canadian soldiers who traveled here during the Second World War, these same places became blood-soaked battlefields. And for many, their graveyard.
This is Morrill River Canadian War Cemetery. It contains the graves of 1,400 Canadians killed in the Battle of the Morrill River and at Ortona. This is a grave of an exceptional soldier. This is Major Alex Campbell, the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, the Hasty Peas. He had led his men off the beach in Sicily. He had led the assault group on Osoro, and he had led them up the boot of Italy, and he died out in front of them on December 25th, 1943, near Ortona. His inscription reads, "Help me to lead them in the fight so they will say he was a man." Alex Campbell died for king and country.
In 1943, the Second World War is in its fourth year. For almost all of that time, while others fight, the men of the 1st Canadian Division have been in England, held back in reserve. They have become the Forgotten Army. But in the summer of 1943, they join a huge Allied force that invades Sicily. In 6 weeks, Sicily is conquered, Canada's first big battle of the war, and its first victory. And the Canadians and Allies invade the mainland. Italy surrenders, and its army ceases to fight. But the Germans decide to turn all of Italy into a battleground. By winter, the Canadians have pursued the Germans north, winning victory after victory. It now seems the Canadians in Italy will no longer be the Forgotten Army. In 1943, the Allied victories in Italy, turning the tide against the Axis powers, have captured the world's headlines. And now the Allies hope to capture the capital, Rome, before the new year. The Allied plan is to strike north past the city of Ortona on the Adriatic coast and liberate Rome. The Canadian 1st Division has fought its way north across the Morrill River and now stands at the gates of Ortona, poised to enter the city.
This is the Adriatic coast south of Ortona. After the Canadians had captured the approaches to the city, there was some thought that the Germans would evacuate without a fight. It wasn't long, though, before gunfire could be heard from inside the city's walls, and the Battle of Ortona was on.
With the eyes of the world fixed on Ortona, the Germans decide to defend the city at all costs and order their garrison of elite paratroopers to fight to the death. Isolated on a rocky plateau and with thick stone walls, Ortona is a natural fortress, an ideal killing ground. And 5 days before Christmas, 1943, the Canadians are ordered to attack Ortona. With the loyal Edmonton Regiment is Lieutenant John Dugan.
There was a tremendous artillery barrage, and we followed close behind the barrage, very close. And that's how we got into the city, the edge of the city.
Desperate to hold the city, the Germans fight for every street, smashing Canadian tanks with anti-tank guns and mines, and blowing up houses to create huge piles of rubble blocking main streets, turning Ortona into a death trap. In a bold gamble, the Canadians tried to drive right through the German obstacles, racing their tanks down the main street of Ortona, the Corso. Advancing alongside the tanks is Major Jim Stone of the loyal Edmonton Regiment.
We started off, and the noise was absolutely deafening. We got 100 yards without a shot being fired at us. I swear to God, if the tanks had kept going, we would have gone straight through the first day. The leading tank stopped, and I was so mad I got up and beat on the tank and asked, "What the hell's the matter?" And of course, the whole impetus was lost. The enemy started to shoot, and then we got stuck.
This is the Corso Vittorio Emanuele, and it's the main street in Ortona. You can actually see bullet holes left from the fighting in 1943. Canadian infantry and tanks advanced down this street, but of course it didn't look like this. The Germans had collapsed buildings on both sides as an obstacle to the tanks and a deadly obstacle to the infantry. Ortona was a battle about tank and infantry cooperation, and the tanks would fire at anything that moved. Sniper fire, machine gun fire, everything would be returned twofold. But the tanks had their own problems because the Germans could drop magnetic mines from the second floor, and of course that would destroy any tank.
With the Canadian tanks attacking into Ortona is 21-year-old Major Ted Griffith.
The Germans had detonated houses into the street in an attempt to channel us into a killing field, where any or all movement by tanks or infantry met immediate machine gun or anti-tank fire. The supporting tank's steel exterior fended off bullets and shrapnel, but anti-tank guns and mines certainly played havoc.
On the main streets, the tanks could help the infantry, but on side streets such as this, they were on their own. They had to move house to house, throwing grenades through the windows, kicking in the doors, and clearing out the Germans. Sniping was so bad that the Canadians were driven indoors, where they employed a technique called mouse holing, which meant they put a large charge in a wall, blew a big hole in it. The men would follow through, clear out the basement, clear up the upstairs, and then move on to the next house. And that's how they cleared Ortona, house by house.
I led my men single file, all of us running like hell into the building. There were Germans in the building, and we disposed of them, and we fought our way up to the top floor. The Germans outside were below us. They had a choice, surrender or be shot. We brought up a sniper, and we disposed of those Germans. German paratroopers rarely surrender.
As Christmas Eve approaches, the fighting becomes more intense. With the German paratroopers is Karl Beerlein.
The enemy continues to advance with tanks and infantry. We are tired from continuously standing to. Anyone who comes back throws himself on straw in the cellar and sleeps like the dead. Again, we blew up houses and lay mines. I was on an upper floor when Canadian infantry burst in down below. I throw down 2 hand grenades and quickly withdraw into the house next door. Now only the largest buildings resist a continuous shell fire. There's destruction and rubble everywhere.
As Christmas Day dawns, Canadian families back home gather round the Christmas tree, while for their fathers and brothers and sons in Ortona, the killing continues. But only a few meters from the front line, some Canadians seize the occasion and celebrate Christmas in the ruins of the Church of Santa Maria in Constantinople.
Outside, our men were dying. In the muddy vineyards, they found their place on earth. A Christmas message through the ages. But they didn't hear the angels sing, only the stutter of machine guns, the crack of rifles, and the screaming, whining, and thudding of shells and mortar bombs. They were as far from Bethlehem as a man could get.
While Christmas is celebrated, reinforcements are continually sent in to replace the dead and the wounded.
Our reinforcements were coming up the street, but I went back to warn them, keep in the doorways. As I was running back towards them, a mortar bomb came over. And they were all wounded or killed, the whole bunch. My commander said, "What's wrong with your leg?" I looked down and there was blood everywhere. I hadn't even noticed. My leg had a big chunk of shrapnel in it. The stretcher bearers came, and that was the end of my fighting in Ortona.
Two days after Christmas, and almost 7 days after entering Ortona, the Canadians finally reached the center of the town, the square of the Cathedral of San Tommaso, and an eerie quiet falls over the ruins of the city.
This is the Basilica of San Tommaso. One of the most famous photographs from the Ortona fighting is of this church literally sheared in half by a German explosion. You can actually see over here where they've incorporated some of the original building in the reconstruction. On December 27th, Canadian troops were in this area and the Germans were close to being cut off, so they decided to evacuate the town. On December 28th, Ortona was in Canadian hands, and it was a great victory for Canada.
The Canadians have driven the elite German paratroopers from Ortona, but the battle has left the city in ruins, where more than 1,000 Italian civilians are dead. The muddy, bloody battle has also left the Allied plan to capture Rome by the end of the year 1943 in ruins.
This is Peter Stursberg of the CBC reporting from the Italian front. For the dead of Ortona, the bell of its cathedral, the Cathedral of St. Thomas the Apostle, tolls. For the Canadians who died in taking the town, the bell tolls.
There are rows of Edmontons and C4s buried in this cemetery, all killed in the street fighting in Ortona. This is Private C.E. Wells, C4th Highlanders, killed 27th December 1943. Precious memories, treasured ever, of days when we were all together. This is Private G. Yellowfly, also C-Force, 27th December 1943. The sun shines, waters flow, the grass grows. Like these, our memories of you shall live forever.
In the new year, the Allies will have a new plan to capture Rome, and the Canadians will once again go into battle, this time at the Liri Valley. Monte Cassino, Italy. For more than 1,000 years, this ancient monastery has overlooked the Liri Valley, which leads to Rome. In early 1944, the Germans have fortified the mountains and the valley here to stop the Allies from reaching Rome. Three times the Allies tried to break through at the Liri Valley, but each time the Germans pushed them back. By spring, little is left of the monastery. But the Germans are still defending a major defensive line across the Liri Valley, the Adolf Hitler Line. And now the Canadians are ordered to spearhead the attack on the Hitler Line, the last barrier before Rome.
This is the Liri Valley, the gateway to Rome. In early 1944, the Allies launched 3 attacks at Cassino trying to break into the valley. And in May 1944, they were going to try a 4th. And this time, the Canadians were going to play a major role in the battle for Rome.
In spring, the Liri Valley is usually a peaceful landscape of wheat fields, poppies, and small farms. But in May 1944, the Germans had prepared a 20-kilometer killing ground of steel and concrete in waiting for the Canadian attack.
This is the Liri Valley, the location of the infamous Adolf Hitler Line. Today, little of the line remains, but there are a few remnants. This is a Panzerturm, and it's a real nifty piece of German engineering. A 3-man crew would operate a tank turret, which would rotate around this hole here, firing cannon or anti-tank shells or machine guns. The Hitler Line was full of these things. Every 1,000 yards had about 15 of them. They'd have machine gun posts behind them, anti-tank weapons, and of course each one of these weapons would be mutually supportive. In addition, out in front, they'd have minefields and barbed wire, and it was against these positions that the Canadians attacked in May 1944. It's hard to imagine what it was like, and the only way I can think of is looking at Charles Comfort's famous painting, The Breaking of the Hitler Line.
As the guns open up to prepare the Canadian assault, with the 1st Canadian Division moving into the Liri Valley, waiting their turn to join the attack, is the Perth Regiment. And serving with the Perths is 20-year-old Stan Cisłowski.
Well, I was always war-minded in respect to the history of it. When I was a kid, I read World War I history. I'd walk 10 blocks to a library to get books on it, and I just lived it. In the beginning, I was upbeat. It says I had aspirations of becoming a hero. But when that first mortar bomb landed, I cut my aspirations down a little bit. Then next few mortars, and pretty soon I wanted to get the heck out of here. A guy can get killed. No sooner we got into the Liri Valley, we had to dig trenches, and we were hungry and thirsty. And every time we were fed, there was a pervasive odor of decomposing body. I didn't know where it was, so I went looking for it. I found a whole leg of a man. And I had to carry that out and throw it on the other side of the hill so I could start eating. I didn't break down. I don't know why, but I didn't break. I just had to look at it and say, well, that's not me. What else could I do?
While the Perths wait in reserve, thousands of Canadian troops are poised to attack the Adolf Hitler Line. Dawn, May 23rd. The Allied artillery barrage begins, and a half a dozen Canadian regiments move forward through the wheat fields and small farms of the Liri Valley towards the Adolf Hitler Line. With the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada is an American volunteer, Charles Munro Johnson.
We lined up in the Liri Valley, thousands of men and hundreds of tanks. The German observers on the mountains could see every one of us and could tell whether or not we had our collars buttoned. Here in the valley, there were just wheat fields and fighting men. There were no ditches or rocks to give us cover.
This is a typical Italian farm in the Liri Valley. And it was one of dozens that was woven into the Adolf Hitler Line. And today it's a functioning farm, but there's still evidence of the fighting that took place in 1944.
A few German shells began to plop about us, tearing down trees and throwing down fragments of metal. Then Jimmy called out, "Let's go!" The line moved forward among the shell bursts like the beginning of a cross-country run. So this was it.
Over here, there's a large palm tree that bears the scars of war. You can see the holes made by the Canadian shells. I'm sure of all calibers. It's hard to tell now because it's grown up so much. But the reason this tree was getting hit so often is over here. Underneath this rubble is a panzer turret. Of course, the turret's gone, but the hole's still there, and that's where they would house the three-man crew. And beside it is an even larger bunker, and it appears that maybe a Panther was there, but the whole thing was destroyed in May '44. But you can see why the Germans put it here, because you can get an incredible view of the Liri Valley.
Directly ahead, Jerry held a machine gun in his arms. A long burst tore into the 8th platoon to my right. I fired 2 rounds from the hip. The Jerry folded up and fell. I stepped on his bloody head as I passed over the position a few seconds later.
On the morning of May 23rd, 1944, the Canadians renewed their assault on the Adolf Hitler Line. This whole area came alive with tanks and men moving up to the front, and the race for Rome was on.
points of German resistance were overrun. The Germans must have been surprised by the fact that no one of us stopped for any reason, even to help the wounded. I came upon little Seabolt, the friend of mine from 8th Platoon. He was on his hands and knees. As I looked down at a gaping wound in his back, he called out, "Am I hit?" I replied, bending down, "You bet you are." The wound, which had been caused by shrapnel, was about 7 inches long and revealed his ribs. He glanced at my left leg and said, "Where'd you get that?" Only then did I become aware of the wound in my left thigh.
May 24th. The Adolf Hitler line is broken, and the 5th Canadian Armored Division races forward as the Germans retreat, leaving thousands of their dead behind in the Liri Valley. For the Canadians, victory in the Liri Valley has not been cheap.
In the hospital, I learned that Needham was dead. Scholarly Ross and Rebel Harris were killed. Cowboy Dykes and Halhead, too, were dead. Fine was also killed. And George Collins, the wheat farmer, would never again weather the Canadian winters or look for crocuses in early spring. His sowing and reaping were finished. The harvest was in.
This is Casino War Cemetery. It contains the graves of 4,500 Commonwealth servicemen who died opening the road to Rome. There are New Zealanders buried here, Indians, British, and 855 Canadians. This is the grave of Private D. Pook of the New Zealand Infantry, and he was killed in action at Casino on the 7th of March, 1944, and he was aged 22. You can see that his family has come here and put his photograph on the grave and created a special memorial for him. It's very touching. This is the grave of Sergeant A.G. Elliott of the North Irish Horse of the Royal Armoured Corps. And he was killed in action at the Adolf Hitler line on 23rd May 1944 in support of the Canadian breakthrough. His personal inscription reads, "For God, for King and country, for loved ones, he freely gave even unto death." He was aged 23. Here are two graves of Indian soldiers buried in the cemetery. This is Rab Nawaz of the 6th Rajputs, and he's beside Abuzar Khan of the 6th Rajputs. They're both killed at Casino in March 1944, and they're both 17 years old. This is the grave of Private A.J. Doucette, Carlton and York Regiment, and he was killed in action 23rd of May 1944 in the breaking of the Hitler line. It's very touching to see that his family have brought a rosary to hang on his grave and a crucifix. It shows that he's not forgotten.
Less than 2 weeks after the Canadians break the Hitler line, the Germans retreat from Rome, declaring it an open city. And American and Canadian Special Forces enter on June 4th, 1944. It is a day of celebration. Just 300 kilometers away, the Germans prepare a seemingly impregnable position, built into the ridges and mountains of northern Italy, ideal defensive terrain. It will be the ultimate test for the Canadians, the Gothic Line. The Allies liberate Rome on June 4th, 1944. This great victory captures headlines throughout the world. But just 2 days later, other Allied armies land in Normandy, and D-Day and the war in France throw the Italian campaign into shadow. The troops now make a bitter joke. They have become the Spaghetti League, the D-Day Dodgers. In 1944, the Allies hoped to strike across the Po Valley and into Austria, at the heart of Nazi Europe. But first they must break through the Gothic Line, which runs across northern Italy to the Foglia River Valley.
This is the Foglia River Valley. You can see where the river enters the Adriatic over at Pescara. The Gothic Line ran through this river valley. It was typical of all German defenses in Italy. They took advantage of every contour, lots of minefields out in front, barbed wire, concrete machine gun posts, always interconnecting with lots of anti-tank weapons. The Canadians were up on these hills, and this time they're going to try something different. There would be no advanced bombardment. They're going to surprise the Germans. So on the morning of August 31st, 1944, the Canadians attacked into the valley.
The Allied command puts the Canadians at the center of the surprise attack, but it gets bogged down, and reserves are called in to assault the heart of the Gothic Line. Waiting to advance with the Perth Regiment is 20-year-old Private Stan Sislowski.
We were on the ridge looking down on the Gothic Line. Well, we couldn't see anything, but it was quite a vista, you know. And then we watched as bombers came over and bombed the line. And we were sitting there like spectators at a ball game up in the hillside. And then we come to Foglia River, and there was a scene of utter confusion. I'd never seen tanks mingling with trucks and jeeps and guys hooting and hollering and smoke and everything else going on. It was chaos. And that kind of unsettles you. You don't know what the heck's going on here. This is Foglia River, and it was just a stony bed. Nothing at all like this. I can't believe it. I don't think anybody else that was in my platoon would recognize it. It's amazing.
The first wave of the attack falters, and D Company of the Perth Regiment is ordered to advance into enemy machine gun positions and minefields.
Sergeant Rowe, Blackie Rowe from Kincardine, Ontario, one hell of a guy. And my Sammy Ridge, also a damn good officer. And they waved us into the field on our right. There's a wire fence there. And on the fence was these triangle signs with Achtung Minen painted on them. I thought, are these guys crazy? And I forget exactly the words I said. I bitched at Blackie Rowe. He says, quit running off at the mouth. Get over that fence, damn it. So I went over the fence, mouthing off under my breath, you know. Okay, Stan, over you go. Boy, my heart was really flipping. And I walked up to where that line of trees, the vineyard starts. That's about where I was, because I was the first or second man in line climbing the fence. So I said, okay, forward. And we started up the thing, and that's when the explosion started. Suddenly my friend, Gord Forbes, was right beside me, just maybe 6 feet away, and he stepped on a mine. So you stop to try to help him, and Sergeant Rowe right behind me, get the hell going, Stan. Try to make yourself light, but how can you? When the guys kept going up on mines, banging here, banging there, you realize you're in a spot where you may never emerge. There were shoe mines. There were little wooden affairs that the mine detector couldn't pick up. And they had a 1/4 pound block of TNT, and just enough to blow a man's foot off. We got up to the road, and it was all bodies were scattered all over this road. I didn't count them. There was Baker Company men that were shot up by the machine gun from the ridge. The guns would open up, and they were chattering along the ditch, slamming the bullets. You could hear them thwacking into the bodies that were already there.
Baker Company has been decimated. Now it is Dog Company's turn to cross the same road with no cover against the same German machine gun. But the gun covers a vital point on the road that the Germans forgot to blow up. It bridges a huge anti-tank ditch at the heart of the Gothic Line. D Company's Sergeant, Blackie Rowe, coolly times the machine gun's fire and orders his men to cross in between its deadly bursts. If Dog Company can get across the road, they will have breached the Gothic Line.
And the sergeant somehow saw that, and he says, okay, finally, he says, first 2 men, when that gun fires next time, as soon as it stops, you hustle ass across the road. They made it. My God, I was stunned. Well, I was in the next group. I said, holy God, here it comes. Well, I never knew I could run 100 yards in 9 seconds flat. I went across that road so fast. The whole company got through. Not a guy got hit, and it was a master stroke. And we got across to that embankment, right where the cemetery is.
In a bold move, the men of D Company have slipped through a crack in the Gothic Line. But now they must assault the high ground at the center of the line. D Company's attack has caught the Germans by surprise and has allowed the Canadians to slip under the German guns and advance up towards their objective, Hill 121, piercing the Gothic Line.
Well, the whole company collected at the embankment here, ready for the assault. And the officer said, well, you can't waste any time here, we got to take that hill. And, well, we just kept going. We automatically fell into extended order, and we're going up, and then we hadn't had any fire coming at us yet. Not till we hit up just beyond the hedge there. That's when I was beginning to wonder what the heck I was going to do up there. I'm not a born killer. Am I going to grab the guy by the throat and strangle him till his eyeballs pop out? Will I stick him in the belly with my bayonet? Or will I slam him on the side of the head with my butt of my rifle? Or will he do that to me? And I was concerned about that because, like I said, I'm not a born killer.
D Company's attack has caught the Germans by surprise and has allowed the Canadians to slip under the German guns and advance up to their objective, Hill 121, overlooking the Gothic Line.
And about a quarter of the way, we came under fire, and the bullets were snapping over our head. I guess the Germans couldn't depress their machine gun far enough down, so we were lucky. But that's when I hit the ground. Everybody did. I wanted to get up and be a one-man army, charge that slope. but the damn stomach was glued to that ground. I couldn't get off. And then I heard Major Ridge hollering behind us. Some swear words, "Get the hell up that goddamn ridge, you guys." And I said, "Yeah, it's easy for him, he's behind us." But anyway, I happened to took a look sideways, and I saw a silhouette of one guy getting up, then another guy, and I said, "Well, if they can get up, I can get up." So I got up and said, "Okay, charge." And it was just about here is where the grenade hit me and knocked me ass over tea kettle backwards. But fortunately, I found myself unhurt. And my buddy beside me was unhurt, Walter Thomas. And I said, "You hurt, Walter?" He said, "Nope." "You?" "Nope." "Let's go." And we went in, and thankfully the Germans had their hands up like that. "Kamerad, Kamerad." And man, was I relieved. Then I walked around like as if I was King Kong.
In a brilliant stroke, the Canadians have broken the Gothic Line. But for many months, the Germans will continue their fierce resistance. Today, it's hard to imagine the fighting that took place on these peaceful fields. But the local people do remember. They have built a monument to commemorate the Canadians and their victory here.
Una notte mi ricordo che quando sono arrivati i canadesi eravamo nascosti nel rifugio qua giù in basso e a un certo momento ero una pattuglia di canadesi, sono venuti giù nel rifugio, abbiamo preso anche un po' di paura, di spavento, ma invece erano gli alleati e chiedevano dove erano i tedeschi. Poi dopo gli adulti più grandi gliel'hanno indicato che stavano già oltre quella collina su, Monteluro, che scappavano via. Da ragazzini si andava, sai, la curiosità era tanta. Abbiamo visto, io ho visto, mi ricordo anche i resti dei poveri soldati, le braccia, un pezzo di torace. I canadesi, qui nel paese vicino dove abitavo io, ce n'erano 4 o 5 porini deceduti. Purtroppo sono dei brutti ricordi.
Even the bad stuff didn't upset me, because it taught me something. It taught me to hold myself together. And one thing I learned who I was and what I was. I was neither a coward nor was I a hero. I was just one of those hundreds of thousand guys in between that try to do my job.
This is the monument on Point 204. It was put up by the Italians to honor the breaking of the Gothic Line by the Canadians in 1944. The Italian campaign was fought over terrain like this, a never-ending series of valleys and rivers, hills and ridges, which always gave the distinct advantage to the enemy. Despite this, the Canadians never wavered. 93,000 Canadians served in Italy, 25,000 were wounded, and 6,000 Canadians died.
In one of the longest, most bloody campaigns of the war, the Canadians helped topple fascist Italy, liberate millions of Italians, and tie down and destroy hundreds of thousands of Nazi Germany's best troops. But Canada's victories in Italy are overshadowed by battles elsewhere. And the Canadians in Italy once again become the forgotten army.
I'm deeply moved by this memorial, that the Italians from this local village should honor the Canadians in this fashion, that they should always be remembered, is tremendous. This inscription is very poignant, and it reads, Gothic Line, August, September 1944. Here the heroic deeds of the 1st Canadian Corps breached the imposing German defenses with the loss of over 1,000 lives for the freedom of Italy and peace in Europe. In witness and as a warning for future generations. The boys of the Spaghetti League should never be forgotten.